before we begin. These stories come from real accounts, strange encounters, and unexplained experiences shared by people who never expected to face something like this. Some were alone, some were not. But all of them walked away with the same feeling, that they were not the only ones out there. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like and subscribe. This channel isn't monetized, and your support keeps these stories coming. Now, turn down the lights and listen closely. Story 1. The Night Listener. He had chosen the spot carefully, far enough from the main trail to avoid other campers, but close enough to a water source to make the night comfortable. The forest in that part of Colorado felt older than most places, dense with tall trees that blocked out the sky and swallowed sound in a way that made even small movements feel distant. By the time he finished setting up his tent and small fire, the sun had already dropped behind the mountains, and the temperature had begun to fall sharply. The first part of the night was uneventful. The usual forest sounds surrounded him: distant rustling, the occasional snap of a twig, the wind brushing through the branches overhead. It was the kind of quiet that people seek out when they want to disconnect. Eventually, he crawled into his tent and drifted off to sleep. Sometime after midnight, he woke suddenly, though he couldn't immediately explain why. At first, everything seemed still, but then he heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling his tent. They weren't rushed or panicked like an animal passing through. These steps were measured, controlled, almost cautious, like something was taking its time. He stayed completely still, listening. The footsteps moved from one side of the tent to the other, stopping occasionally, then continuing again. That's when the sound changed. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. He heard breathing. Deep, steady breathing. Close enough that it sounded like it was just outside the thin fabric wall. It wasn't the sharp panting of an animal. It was slower, more controlled, almost human. He didn't move, didn't unzip the tent, didn't even reach for the flashlight beside him. Every instinct told him to stay completely still. For what felt like an eternity, the thing continued circling him, stopping every few moments as if it was listening, matching his silence with its own. After nearly 20 minutes, the footsteps began to move away. Slowly at first, then fading into the distance until the forest returned to its normal quiet. He didn't sleep again that night. When the sun finally rose, he stepped outside carefully, scanning the area around his camp. What he saw made his stomach drop. Massive footprints surrounded the tent. They were deep, clearly pressed into the ground, and spaced much farther apart than a normal person's stride. Each one was shaped like a human foot, but far larger. There were no animal tracks, no signs of anything else. Whatever had been there had been walking on 2 legs. Story 2. The Tree Line Figure. The air was cold that morning, thick with fog that rolled slowly through the forest like a low, drifting cloud. He had been sitting in position for nearly an hour, waiting for movement, his rifle resting across his lap as he watched the tree line ahead of him. At first, the shape didn't register as anything unusual. Just a darker patch among the trees, something that blended into the shadows. But the longer he looked, the more it stood out. It was too tall, too still. He adjusted his position slightly and raised his rifle, focusing more carefully. But something about it felt wrong. The proportions didn't match. The shoulders were too wide, the arms hung too low, and the way it stood was completely motionless, as if it had been frozen in place. He kept the rifle trained on it, waiting for some kind of movement, some confirmation of what he was seeing. Then it moved. Not by stepping, but by leaning. The entire figure shifted sideways behind a tree, almost like it was trying to hide, but didn't quite understand how to do it properly. The motion was slow, unnatural, and completely silent. He lowered his rifle slightly, unsure of what he was looking at. A few seconds later, it was gone. No sound of movement. No crashing through brush. Nothing. He approached the area cautiously, scanning the ground for tracks, broken branches, anything that might explain what he had seen. There was only one set of impressions in the dirt. Deep, heavy marks where something had been standing. There were no tracks leading away. Story 3. The Road Follower. It was well past midnight when he started the drive. The road stretching endlessly through a remote area with no streetlights and very little traffic. The kind of road where your headlights feel like the only light in the world. At first, everything was normal. The hum of the engine, the steady rhythm of the tires against the pavement, the occasional glance in the mirrors to check for anything behind him. Then he noticed movement. Something was keeping pace with his truck, just outside the beam of his headlights. He caught it in his side mirror, a shape running alongside him. He assumed it was a deer at first, maybe startled and running parallel to the road. But when he sped up slightly, the shape didn't fall behind. It matched his speed. Curious, he accelerated more. 50 miles per hour. Then 60. Still there, he turned his head just enough to get a better look. And that's when everything changed. The shape wasn't moving like an animal. It was upright. Running on two legs, his heart started pounding as he pressed the gas harder, pushing the truck faster than he had intended. 70 miles per hour. For a few seconds, the figure stayed with him, moving effortlessly beside the vehicle, before suddenly veering off into the darkness of the trees. He didn't slow down. He didn't stop. Not until he reached the next town, where the lights and buildings made everything feel slightly more real again. The next morning, he walked around his truck, trying to convince himself it had all been some kind of illusion. That's when he saw the scratches. Long, deep marks running along the side of the door, as if something had reached out and dragged its hand across the metal while keeping pace with him. Story 4. The Creek Encounter. The creek was quiet that afternoon, the water moving slowly over smooth stones, creating a steady, calming sound that filled the space around him. He had chosen the spot because it was isolated, far enough from any trails that he wouldn't be disturbed. For a while, everything felt normal. He cast his line, watched the water, and let the silence settle in. Then he heard it, a sudden splash upstream. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was a fish or maybe a small animal crossing the water. But the sound came again, louder this time, heavier. It didn't sound like something small. He turned slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the disturbance. That's when he saw it. Something was crouched in the creek, partially hidden by the water and the surrounding rocks. It was large, much larger than any animal he had expected to see there. For a moment, it stayed still. Then it stood up. Water poured off its body as it rose to its full height, towering over the creek bed. It didn't rush. didn't react like an animal that had been spotted. It simply turned its head and looked directly at him. The distance between them suddenly felt very small. He didn't move, couldn't move. After several long seconds, the figure stepped out of the creek and disappeared into the trees in just a few strides, moving with a speed that didn't match its size. He left everything behind, his gear, his line, everything, and walked back to his vehicle without looking back. Story 5. The Cabin Knock. The cabin was supposed to be a quiet retreat, a place to get away from everything and spend time in the woods without distractions. It was old, but well maintained, sitting at the edge of a dense forest with no other houses nearby. The first night was peaceful. The second night, the knocking started. It came at exactly 2:13 a.m. 3 sharp knocks against the wall, then silence, then 3 more. At first, they brushed it off as the house settling, the wood expanding and contracting with the cold night air. But it kept happening. Every night. The same time. The same pattern. Eventually, curiosity turned into concern. One night, as soon as the knocking began, the father stepped outside to see if he could find the source. The forest was completely still. Then he heard it again. A single knock. Not from the house, but from the trees. Another knock answered it from farther away. Then another, even farther, moving deeper into the forest. It sounded like something was communicating. He went back inside and didn't mention what he heard until the next morning. They left the cabin a few days later and never returned. Story 6. The breathing behind him. The trail had been busy earlier in the day, but by the time he reached the deeper section of the forest, he was completely alone. The trees grew thicker, blocking out most of the light, and the air felt noticeably colder. At first, it was just a feeling, that sense of being watched. Then came the silence, the kind that replaces all natural sound, leaving the forest unnaturally still. That's when he heard it. Breathing, close enough that it felt like it was just behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing. He stood there for a moment, listening, trying to calm himself down. Then he started walking again. The breathing returned, matching his pace. Every step he took, it followed. He stopped. It stopped. He walked again. It started again. After several minutes of this, panic set in. He broke into a run, moving as fast as he could down the trail without looking back. When he finally reached the trailhead, he turned around one last time. The trail behind him was empty. Later, when he reviewed the footage from his camera, he noticed something in the background of several clips. A dark shape, always just behind him. Story 7. The camp that went silent. There were 4 of them, experienced campers who had spent plenty of time in the wilderness before. They chose the location because it was remote, far from any crowded campsites, a place where they could enjoy the quiet without interruption. The first few hours after sunset were normal. Then the sound started. Heavy footsteps in the distance, branches snapping, something moving through the trees just out of sight. At one point, a rock landed near the edge of their camp. Not rolled, thrown. They stayed alert, watching the tree line, trying to figure out what was out there. Then, around 3 a.m., everything stopped. No wind, no insects, no movement. The forest went completely silent. One of them swore he saw something just beyond the firelight. A tall figure standing between the trees, watching them. None of them slept that night. By sunrise, they packed up and left. None of them ever went back. Story 8. The Snow Tracks. The snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a clean, untouched layer that made it easy to see any movement through the area. When he stepped outside, he immediately noticed the tracks. Large impressions leading from the edge of the woods toward his property. At first, he assumed it was a bear. But the tracks didn't stay consistent. After a short distance, they began to change. The shape became more defined, more human-like. The stride length increased, the spacing between each step growing wider. He followed them cautiously, his curiosity outweighing his concern. The tracks led into an open clearing, and then they stopped. No return tracks, no continuation, just an empty space where their prints ended. He stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. There was no explanation for how something could simply stop like that. Story 9. The Morning Watcher. It started as a feeling more than anything else. Every morning, as she stepped outside with her coffee, she felt like something was watching her from the tree line behind her house. At first, she ignored it. It was easy to dismiss, to convince herself it was just her imagination. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. Eventually, she started noticing movement in the same spot each morning. Subtle at first, just enough to catch her attention. Then one day, it stepped forward. A tall figure, partially visible between the trees, standing just far enough into the open to be seen. It didn't move, didn't react. It just watched. She went back inside and closed the door. She never saw it again. But she never stopped feeling like something was still out there. Story 10. The Final Scream. They had been sitting around the fire for hours, talking, laughing, enjoying the quiet isolation of the woods. It was late, but none of them were ready to sleep yet. That's when they heard it. A scream. It started low, almost like a distant call, but quickly rose into something much louder, much closer. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound like any animal they recognized either. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the forest in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Then it came again, closer this time. One of them grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. For a brief moment, something moved through the light. Tall, fast, silent. The screaming stopped. But none of them slept that night. And none of them could agree on what they had seen. These are just a few of the encounters that people have experienced in places far from the noise of everyday life. Whether you believe these stories or not, one thing remains consistent. The wilderness is vast, and sometimes it feels like something else is out there with us. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps keep this channel going, and there are many more encounters still to come. Sleep well and stay aware.